On today's episode of the Bradeaux and Will Show, we're going to be doing a recap of the Rockets offseason. The free agency, they just traded away 4 young players, and they also just, they signed 4 new guys as well. So we're going to be breaking those down, our thoughts. So you don't want to miss this episode of the Bradeaux and Will Show.
All right, and welcome back to the episode of the Bradeaux and Will Show. I'm your first host, as always, Will. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Bias Houston. And I'll quickly shout out the podcast on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. We just hit 1.3K subscribers today, so really appreciate you guys for helping us hit that goal. Continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll pass it off to Brad.
Yeah, I got to appreciate you guys for tapping in. 1.3 is cool to see. So if you haven't already, make sure to sub, keep supporting us. We really appreciate it. Y'all know where to find me, man. As always, Bradeaux NBA, Instagram, Twitter, favorite stats, highlights, news, updates. I got y'all covered. Today, we have a big episode of free agency. A lot of stuff just happened. So we have Rockets Insider Paulo Alves on the show. And we're doing inside joke. we got our boy Paulo for the show to help us recap. How you doing today, Paulo?
What's up, y'all? I mean, I guess it's another meme now. I'm gonna have to live with that one, just like the scammer one. I guess that one is at least a little bit more positive, I guess.
Definitely. Well, we got Will in charge today, so we're gonna let him.
Yeah, I'll guide us this episode. But yeah, let's jump right into it. So, a lot happened, as Brad said in the intro. There's a lot of new faces. A lot of faces that we love are gone. And free agency kind of started off with a bang. Like the very first, Wells notification that hit our phones pertaining to the Houston Rockets was something kind of, I guess what you'd say was, I wouldn't say my worst fear, but y'all know I definitely wasn't the biggest fan of the VanVleet impending contract. But it's here. VanVleet signed for a 3-year, $130 million contract. Now, the good news is that last year of those 3 years is a team option, so it's really closer to just a 2-year deal. But he's here, starting point guard of the Rockets next season. Paulo, what were your thoughts when you saw that notification at your phone?
Well, I panicked. If anybody follows me on Twitter, they know I was mad because to me that 3-year, the fact that it's a 3-year deal, early on we didn't know that it was a team option. When it hit the timeline, I'm like, dude, we caved. And not only did we caved massively because we could have. What I was thinking at the time was we could have caved and just offered the third year, but maybe offer a little bit less money per year or something like that. It looked like we offered him like a max, like $45 million a year or 43 on average for 3 years. I was thinking about that third year, Alperen Şengün and Dillon Brooks extension starts kicking in. We're gonna have guys to pay. We're going to get other free agents in this very class that are probably going to have contracts by then, and it was just a mess. Not only was I not the biggest fan of Fred VanVleet, as a guy to bring in, I eventually warmed up to him, and I can argue for him. But at the time, it just looked like they were going to lose him, and they caved. And to me, that was awful. But then, when we did get the news later on that it is a team option, to me that's ideal. When the deal first came out, I didn't even consider that it could be a team option because the narrative that we had up to that point was the Raptors were putting their offer together, and so Fred VanVleet was going to come back. And so what it struck me as, okay, the Rockets had to do something to get him, and that's what they did. I could never have imagined that it's a team option because a team option is actually better than a 2-year deal because you have, they'll probably not take it, but you have the option if he's overperforming the contract. That's more flexibility on your end. So I was extremely surprised and extremely happy because the Rockets for the next 2 years, they're I'll make a change on the borrowed time phrase. I'll say they're playing on borrowed money because they have a lot of 6 out of the 10 guys on the rotation, or 5 depending on if Cam Whitmore's there or not, are playing on rookie deals. And they're going to be playing more minutes than what their contracts are worth, right? So we have this advantage for the next 2 years, which is why we can afford to overpay to get the best guys out there, which is why a 2-year deal is fine. But once you go past that, now we're messing with the money that we're going to need to extend these guys, and I don't have the confidence. I don't think anybody has the confidence that if it takes going into the tax to keep some of these guys, that Stillman Fertitta is going to do it. I mean, he has proven us that he is not as cheap as we thought, but he still hasn't proven us that he's willing to go into the tax. So all of these things were running through my head. But as far as the signing in general, now I'm actually really happy with it. We as I said, we're playing on borrowed money. And Fred VanVleet has all the intangibles. He's a leader on the court. He's a good defender. He's going to demand more out of Jalen Green. He's a great passer, so he fits really well with what we needed. He fills the gap.
Is that a little bit of echo there?
Yeah, that was a little bit of echo. I don't know if whatever. So he feels a need, right? And we're now in a position where, especially for Jalen Green, he now has Fred VanVleet to one side and Dillon Brooks to the other, which means if he's not fighting through a screen or he's being lazy or whatever it is on defensive end, he's going to stick out like a sore thumb, and it's going to be easier to hold him accountable, as opposed to last year. Everybody's so shit at defense that, I mean, if you're going to go up to Jalen Green and say, hey, your effort needs to be better, he has all the right in the world to look at it and say, hey, nobody's playing defense. You're coming to me, right? That's not an ideal response, but it's something that you'd understand out of an NBA player when everybody else is doing badly. If he does badly this year on defense, everybody's going to know that it's about him. And so I was someone who really liked Harden coming back earlier on, but noticing that this team needs a reset in culture, I'm also down for Fred VanVleet. It's not my ideal scenario, but I can understand why they did it, and it's up to them now to go into the season and prove that it's worth it.
What you think, Brett?
Yeah, so initially, obviously, the third year is a concern because the entire offseason, all we heard was, the Rockets want to keep these short-term deals and, save themselves for the future, being flexible. Not only just that, it was more so like you have a third year and Alman Thompson is your point guard you just drafted. You want him on the floor starting at least by that time. So that was the initial concern. I wasn't worried about the max money because I do understand you have to overpay to get guys to a very, very bad team. So I'd already accepted that portion of it. But to find out it was a team option, A+++ signing, in my personal opinion. Fred VanVleet is a guy that the Rockets have been missing leadership-wise, and just a very gritty point guard. He could shoot, even though the percentages were pretty bad last year, 34 for his standards. It's not that's not his best percentages. Like career-wise, he's around 37, so he can shoot. He can shoot, play make, defense. He's got all the things of an Ime Udoka guy. And again, Udoka just had Marcus Smart, who won depoy. So he's going to love a guy like Fred VanVleet, who kind of plays really gritty basketball as well on that side of the court. And likes to pick up full court. That's his kind of style. So it's going to be a good fit. I'm happy with Fred VanVleet coming in day one as a starter. He's going to take care of the ball. Again, 100th percentile in passing efficiency this past season. That means he's taking care of the ball, he's making smart passes, and he's not turning the ball over either. He's in the range with CP3 and Tyrese Halliburton in that category. So it's good things coming for the Rockets, especially the point guard position. That sloppiness is out the way. So I'm excited for this stuff. What do you
think? I think if you've been a participant in some of our spaces that we do daily at this point, or even listen to the episode we did with J-Dub last Thursday, I wasn't the biggest Fred VanVleet guy. And I'm not going to sit here and go down that road because I've explained it a couple of times now on that episode in spaces. So you guys probably know how I feel about Fred. And he's here now, so there's nothing more I can do about that. I agree with Paulo. I was like uncontrollably angry when I thought that there was a third year and it was a 3-year max. Because no matter how you feel about Fred, even if I get the whole you overpay for 2 seasons, he's not a max contract guy. So to give that guy 3 years, I was like, no. And then like Paulo said, that's going to start bleeding into what you can do when Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, when they're extension eligible. And so that third year I was, and on top of that, there's also the world where, as much as we can say that he could, the Raptor could age well, it could also age poorly. And I just think that that's a necessary risk to take for Fred VanVleet. So I was extremely upset when I thought there was a third year on. I was praying that that third year was a team option, and lo and behold, it was. So the contract, the signing goes from like disastrous to me to I like it. I don't, like I said, I'm not Brad. You gave it A++. I'm gonna give it an A++. I'll give it like a I think I gave it like a B
Yeah.
minus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like it's a good signing. Like I won't sit here and act like he makes us worse because he doesn't. We're gonna be a better team with Fred on the floor next year. We're gonna have the closest thing to a real point guard that we've had since James Harden left. Um, and I think one of the things that really intrigues me about Fred VanVleet over the guys like the James Hardens and the Kyrie Irvings who were also free agents this summer is that he is someone who can fit into Udoka's scheme defensively. And so that somewhat excites me, right? That I have a point guard who I can pair in the backcourt into Jalen, who can take care of the ball not just offensively but also defensively. Um, and like I said, I think he's going to bring an edge, some greediness to our locker room. He's someone who's had to overcome odds to get to where he's at. To when going from was he was undrafted, right? Like he didn't even get drafted.
Yeah.
Had to claw his way to a NBA roster, summer league, then the roster, training camp. Then he's finding a way to play in the playoffs and the NBA Finals. He's the champion, and now he's signed his third contract in the NBA, and this one's a max. So he knows a little something about overcoming odds and adversity, right? So that I think just having that in our locker room with our young guys is going to be really good. Like I said, having someone to set the table for them. He's going to make us a better team offensively and defensively. And so for that reason, I'm like I said, I don't love it, but I don't hate it. Like I think we're a better team and I'm cool with it. But speaking of deals that I was not the coolest one with, right? The Dillon Brooks signing. That was one where, yeah, like I the last podcast and in spaces, I've said that, get Fred on a 2-year deal, overpay for him for 2 years. That wouldn't be what I would do if I was in charge, but I understand why you go out there and do it. Don't get the logic behind Dillon Brooks. And so, yeah, I'll wait till it's my turn around to give my thoughts on the Dillon Brooks 4 years, $80 million of guaranteed money. Paulo, what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I liked it, right? But I can somewhat defend a little bit of the logic behind it from the front office's perspective. Like me personally, I don't rate Dillon Brooks as a player that much. I don't think the Rockets need another problem with shot selection. I think we have enough of those for Ime Udoka to fix. I don't think you need to compound another one on top of that. I would have rather paid the same money for a guy like Bruce Brown, even though it's an overpay. I think this is an overpay as well. But at least it's a guy that is not volatile, right? I don't. What's scary with a long-term deal for Dillon Brooks is, well, this offseason he said he wanted a bigger role than he had, and he already had a pretty big role in Memphis. In Memphis, he's like the third most shots on the team, when he's clearly not the third best player. And he has the personality that he has. That is a strength on defense, but it's also, part of his shortcomings on offense. And because he is so volatile, it reminds me a little bit of the Christian Wood situation, where Christian Wood wanted to be more than he was ready to be, and because of that, he got in the way of other players, and eventually he had to be moved. Well, Christian Wood was on a 2-year deal, and when he was moved, he was expiring. Dillon Brooks has 4 years. If something happens wrong in the first 2 years, or in the first year or in the second year, nobody's picking up that contract. It's too long of it's probably an overpay. It's too long. And teams aren't in the business of taking on contracts like that right now, even if the player's good. They're in the business of doing the opposite. Guys like John Collins are being dumped, even though they're decent NBA players, because their contracts are really big and the teams are scared of the new CBA coming in. Trying to understand it, right? I kind of see why so if you believe in him, right? If you believe he's a better player than what I believe and I think Will believes he is, then I can understand it, because at some point, right, it's Rafael Stone's team and it's Ime Udoka's team. And if they believe in this guy, they should go after the guys that they believe in, which sounds all good, but it also means that they'll be judged if it doesn't work out, and they'll be judged by going after this guy, this being their guy, right? There's no problem with going after your guy, but then you've got to live with the consequences if that guy doesn't pan out to be what you're expecting him to be. So we just got to hope that he works out and he's as good as they think he is for the sake of the team. As far as the contract structure goes, I think 20 million is an overpay. We got the report from Kelly Eco today that a part of that's incentives. We don't know how much, but we know that per the new CBA, incentives can go up to 20% of the total contract, right? Which means that it's a $20 million a year deal, but we don't know we don't know yet how much of it is incentives, but it could be as low as $16 million a year, with the extra $4 million being incentives, right? Which means, hey, if it's $16 million a year and the incentives are shoot 36% from three, and the team wins 45 games, then it's basically a $16 million a year deal, and you're more than happy to pay, the extras if he is shooting 37% from three, and you're more than happy to pay it if the team's winning 45 games. So I think still to be decided on what the incentives are, but it has a potential to be a better deal than what it looks like. And I like that it's descending, right? Because by the end, the first 2 years, as I said, we're on borrowed money, so how much we're paying him during those 2 years doesn't really make a difference to me unless we're looking to trade him in the scenario like I mentioned earlier. Once we reach the end of those 2 years, he basically has a 2-year, $38 million deal, which to me is actually good. I think that's going to be a good value contract by then, because looking at the past 2 years, the cap has risen by 10 million each year. If we assume that that's going to keep going, and it's 10 to 12, I think from last year to this year, it's actually 12 million. If we assume that that's going to keep going, by then, I think Nathan Falk had the calculations on this. It will be 13% of the cap by the third year, which is the equivalent of what Robert Covington made when he was in Houston, and we thought his deal was a steal. So by then it'll be a good deal, but to me the big risk is if it doesn't work out, you can't move him, because I don't think anybody's taking that contract early on, especially in the first 2 years. So I'm okay with the pain early because of what I said about the borrowed money. But if it goes completely wrong, then you took a massive gamble and you're not going to be able to get off of it anytime soon. So as I said, it's just they gotta live. It's their decision. They really like the player. Hopefully it works out, because if it doesn't, well, they're going to suffer from it.
I'll say this about the Dillon Brooks signing. Again, when you see the 4 years, you obviously go right into a panic, because as I mentioned in my first statement, they were talking about these short-term deals and all this stuff, and then boom, we get a 3-year deal, and then we get a 4-year deal. So again, Dillon Brooks, I personally am okay with the signing itself. Player-wise, you're getting a lockdown defender. This is a guy who ranked 100th percentile in perimeter defense and in matchup difficulty. So he's doing it against the toughest opponents. So he's coming in to lock up. Again, Rockets team has been terrible in defense the past 3 seasons. They get a guy like Fred to come in, change up the intensity. Definitely Dillon Brooks, who's going to change up that intensity. And he's really going to help guys like, Ahmed Thompson, who's 6'7", that's 7-foot wingspan. You also got guys like Jabari Smith Jr., 6'11", 7'2" wingspan, Tari Eason, 6'8", 7'2" wingspan. 3 guys that are young, a ton of defensive potential, are going to feed off of the energy from Fred and Dillon, and they're going to improve every single day seeing that stuff in practice. And it can be preached by the coach as many times as possible. When you have guys on the court that, lead by example, those young guys are going to follow. But more on Dillon Brooks as a player, that's a guy that you can just stick on another team's best player, and he can just cause havoc. So that's going to be good for this Rockets team to have. And when it comes to that 4 years, $20 million contract, 80 total, Solomon Ali, if you guys follow him on Twitter, he has some good stuff. He had an article where he looked at a few other guys who shoot in the range of Dillon Brooks from 3. DeAndre Hunter, who's a guy who's making $22.5 million. Karis LeVert, who's shooting with 34% from 3. He's making $17 million. I think Dillon Brooks is better than Karis LeVert. He's way better defensively. Offensively, we're not going to talk about that. But $20 million, again, to get a guy that's going to lock up someone, I'm okay with that. At the end of the day, you're going to be mad at first. Like, oh, they just gave this man a 4-year deal. But, when you look back at it, I always tell people, I think by the time 2023 is over, Rockets fans are going to talk themselves into really liking Dillon Brooks. He's a Patrick Beverley-esque kind of player. The guy that you hate if he's on another team. Like, oh, keep that fool away from my team and this, that. But when he's on your team, you love him, right, Rockets? So, and it's just funny seeing other fan bases say, like, oh, I hate him. Just wait till he goes to the team. And then they love him. So I think Dillon Brooks is going to have that same kind of impact. And I can't wait to see what he does come October. But what's up, Will?
Yeah, so that was the Fred VanVleet deal. Wasn't a huge fan of, but you could convince me that Fred VanVleet for 2 years, right? There's pretty much no risk there outside of the money that you're spending that you could be spending elsewhere. He's gonna make us better. Like, he fulfills that need of a point guard. That's one thing I forgot to mention when I talked about Fred. but Fred was also like Udoka and Stone's primary target. So I on that hand, I am glad that they were able to get their guy. I think it will be kind of concerning to a degree if they spent all their resources trying to target one guy and they couldn't get him. So for that, I am kind of happy that they were able to get that part of the deal done. But like I said, I was able to get behind the Fred stuff, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of it, because it was only for 2 years. And my understanding was same thing with the Dillon Brooks stuff. Now, I didn't want to pay Dillon Brooks a penny, right? Like you could have told me he was going to sign on the Houston Rockets for the veteran minimum, and I would have said I don't want him, because I have seen him shoot teams out of the playoffs, right? I've seen him. I think Paulo talked about it. He thinks he's the best player on his team when he's probably not top 3 on the team, and you look at kind of some of his weaknesses. I touched on this last episode. Some of his weaknesses are the same weaknesses the Houston Rockets already have. And so it's like you're not really, you're going to make the defense better, but there are guys out there like the Bruce Browns, like the Grant Williams, guys out there who are also available who would help address the defense without compromising the offense. Now, they're not going to address it as much as Brooks will. I won't, sit there and act like that's not true, because Brooks is probably the best wing defender in free agency. We got the best wing defender, so that's cool. But he's not, I'm saying those other guys are still pretty good defensively, and they're not going to lose you a playoff game because they shoot 15 times a night when they should be shooting 5, So that's why I was like, man, I don't want that guy. But same thing with the Fred VanVleet stuff. I wouldn't pay him a penny. But if you want to tell me that the idea is that Ime Udoka can under his player relations, and he's the stern voice in the locker room, you want to tell me that Udoka can try to fix Dillon Brooks, I wouldn't bet on it, so I wouldn't pay him. But I understand the logic behind that. That was when I thought it was going to be a 2-year deal. Same thing with Fred, where if it goes south, it's expiring after 1 season. So it's not that big of a deal, right? It could be worse. Bro, we gave this guy 4 years, $80 million. And like, to my understanding, I didn't even know about the incentive. I knew there was incentives. I didn't know that was, that meant that some of that that $20 million a year was less. But even still, man, like, that's crazy to me, because when you look at what the market was for Dillon Brooks, it wasn't that, at least reportedly, wasn't that big, right? There were 4 teams that reportedly had interest in him, to my knowledge. It was the Lakers, the Bucks, what other team? The Mavericks and the Rockets. Those were the 4 teams that they were reporting had interest in Dillon Brooks. The Lakers went and spent their money on Gabe Vincent and Jackson Hayes and Cam Reddish, so they can't afford Dillon Brooks no more. The Bucks, made Christmas take that pay cut and then spent the rest of their money on stealing Brook Lopez from us. We're going to talk about that later. So they don't got no money for Dillon Brooks no more. The Mavericks extended Kyrie. I think they re-signed Seth Curry. I think it might have been like another deal they did out there, but they spent their money. So now they can't afford Dillon Brooks. So the only team that with the amount of money left over to sign Dillon and who's want Dillon Brooks is the Rockets. So I don't see how who were we bidding against that made us go all the way up to 4 years, $80 million. I don't understand that. And so I will say that there is a world where Dillon Brooks does come under Udoka and gets his shot selection under control, gets his IQ under control, and maybe Ben Sullivan makes some tweaks to his jumper and he starts shooting, something respectable. Who knows, right? And if that happens, then we look back at these conversations and we're like, when Rockets fans didn't like that deal because that Dillon Brooks guy was really good. But there's also a world where he doesn't fix his jumper. I said it the last episode. I'll say it again. When people show you who they are, you got to believe them sometimes, man. And he's had, about 4 or 5 seasons now showing us who he is. I understand he wasn't under a coach like Udoka, but I think it would be foolish to dismiss the risk entirely of a guy like Dillon Brooks, because there's a world where, you got to bench him because he's shooting you out the playoffs. He's shooting you out of important games. He's taking stupid shots. He's not doing what you need to do. In full disclosure, I am watching Brandon Miller play right now. I have to, if you follow what's going on with me and this guy, I got to see what goes down with him. There's an inherent risk there with Dillon Brooks that if he doesn't become that guy that you want him to be, that you're stuck paying him a contract that you're going to have to use an asset to get off of. And so for that, I wasn't the biggest fan of giving him that much money for that long. But he's here now, and nothing I can do about it. I wish I could make it go back in time, but I can't. So the positives of that, he is going to make us a better defensive team. I think it is pretty cool that we have somebody who you can't stick on the opposing's best perimeter player, and you can have good faith that he's going to do a really good job, like as good a job as anybody in the NBA would do on him. That's somebody who Jalen Green, KPJ, Amon Thompson, those guys are going to have to get guarded against in practice every day. So that iron sharpening iron aspect of it is going to be really cool to see. Brandon Miller just traveled, by the way, so I'm looking pretty good right now. But yeah, like he's gonna make us a better team defensively. And like I think Brad kind of touched on it a lot. Like he's the kind of guy who you absolutely hate when he's not on your team. But I could see a world where I end up like, what, man, I like Jayshawn Tate, and Jayshawn Tate really can't shoot. I wouldn't say he has the IQ. I think he's actually a whole lot smarter than Dillon Brooks. But Jayshawn Tate's another guy who has a lot of flaws that I really, really like because he's just a dog, right? Like he just does the dirty work, does the little things that doesn't always show up in the box score, but like you can tell, like he just impacts winning. And Dillon Brooks, for better or for worse, is a guy who can do that. And so yeah, like maybe I'll look back on this signing, 2-3 years from now and be like, I remember that time where I was mad we signed Dillon Brooks. Maybe I look back on it, I'm like, man, like we should not have signed that guy. And I just think that because there's that much like gray area to where it could be either really good or really bad, the contract is really bad for me. That's why I gave that one. I think I gave like a C- because like I don't know, man. But that's my thoughts on the Dillon Brooks situation. We can keep it pushing. We got two kind of quick hitters that the Rockets did later on Saturday as well. They signed Jock Landale to a 4-year, $32 million contract, and they signed Jeff Green to a 1-year, I believe, $6 million contract. So, Paulo, what were your thoughts on those two signings and what they're going to bring to the Houston Rockets?
And yeah, I think signing those two guys, right? It came at a time. I think a lot of people being really pessimistic about the offseason is like the order of the moves, because we heard about that Atlanta deal that I'm sure we'll get into it in a little bit, and it set everybody's expectations to, oh, you don't do a deal that's stupid unless you have something else planned. And so everybody was hoping and trying to figure out what it was that they had planned. And then the first news that comes out is, well, first they're signing Dillon Brooks, which everybody already knew. And now they're signing Jock Landale. And we knew that they were targeting a center, and now we just signed a center that's, backup grade, right? He played some games for DeAndre Ayton in the playoffs. But we know what DeAndre Ayton was doing in the playoffs and why he had to be subbed. It wasn't that exciting, right? But then it came out that it's kind of like the KPJ deal, where year 1 is guaranteed, year 2 is not guaranteed, year 3 is not guaranteed, and the 4th year is a team option. So it's basically a 1-year deal where you have options to extend every single year if the guy plays up to his contract. So it's a flyer, right? And it's an interesting guy to take a flyer on because Jock Landale is actually a pretty interesting player. He has some passing, he has some shooting ability that he hasn't shown in the NBA, but back in Europe he had. And he's overall a smart backup center that has shown flashes for 2 teams now, with the Spurs and then with the Suns, and he's still young. And so it makes sense to take a flyer on him. You just missed on your biggest target, and you managed to you had this guy, you were able to get him. Since we have a lot of cap space that we're now likely not going to use because Brook Lopez just refused to sign. Let's take a shot at this guy. Perhaps he couldn't get a better deal elsewhere. Perhaps we overpaid a little bit on this 1 year, but it was because we wanted that team control throughout the other 4 years, because if it's a home run, then you got a team control for a while. He's interesting. He's a backup center. I'm not going to say it's massive deal. Jeff Green made me really happy. It was a couple of hours later. Everybody, I was talking about. I was so depressed about how everything was going on. And then the news hit, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a feel-good story, right? Everybody loves Jeff Green, especially since he has been on the Rockets already. He just won a championship. He is still an interesting player. Right? It's a small ball 5 or 4 spacing 4, still athletic, even though he's old. He's probably not going to play, but if you want to bring in vets, I can't think of a better name than him. He already has history with the Rockets. So it's just a feel-good moment. He's a good vet to have around. I'm glad they did it. It makes me, happy as a fan. It's not objectively, looking at the contract, the value, whatever. It's not that significant, but as a fan, it makes you feel good, and that's basically how I took it. And I look forward to watching him, for whatever 5 minutes a game it is throughout the season when somebody gets injured. I look forward to watching him in the Rockets jersey again.
Yeah, like I'll touch on the Jock Landale signing right after this, but Jeff Green, I absolutely just loved seeing the Rockets make that move. Again, like perfect leadership guy to have. There's a viral video that went out in the playoffs. He was talking to Aaron Gordon, and he was pretty much just explaining to him like what he should have been doing in this specific situation. And if he could do that to a 27-year-old Aaron Gordon, he's definitely going to be able to do the same thing. And TC's young Rockets players, the main core, so there's certain aspects and things to do, like right position on defense, different situations on offense. Jeff Green is that guy that everybody respects. He's been in the league forever. I want to say he was even on the Seattle Supersonics. That's how old
he was drafted, I believe.
Yeah. So it's great to have Uncle Jeff in, man. He doesn't age. There's a video of him dunking on Giannis this past season in like February. Like that's how crazy it is. He's still got all the bunnies in the world. So I love the Jeff Green signing. He might not even play, but I'll still love it. But Jock Landale, again, 1 year guaranteed, 4-year deal, $32 million. Jock is a guy. He has a beautiful shooting form. If y'all watch his form, he shoots really nice, but he hasn't been able to find his stroke in the NBA. When he was in the NBL in 2021, he shot 38.8% from three on 3.7 attempts. So he's got the jumper. He just hasn't found it yet in the NBA. And this past season with Phoenix, he actually abandoned his three-point shot completely towards the end of the season. So another Ben Sullivan project. He's going to be busy this offseason. But if he fixes that jumper, he's going to be a really good guy to space the floor. Really good in the pick and roll. Jock was as well. 70% at the rim. Last time I checked, I have to double check. But 70% at the rim, I'm pretty sure that's solid. And then on defense, he's a positive interior defender, better than you would expect. So I'm excited to see people. They attack him at the rim. They're not scared to attack him, but he holds his own pretty well. So I like the Jock Landale signing against 1 year guaranteed. So if it doesn't go well, he's gone. But I think he's a guy that'll probably stick around longer than we expect. Yeah.
I'm over here smiling because Brandon Miller has bricked the shot, traveled again, and then threw a lob that got picked off. So he's
struggling.
Yeah, he's having a predictably bad debut, man. That's why I have to make sure I watched. But the Jock Landale signing, I said it on Twitter, and it came out like right in the middle of like everybody kind of being like, man, we just signed Dillon Brooks to 4 years, $80 million. But I thought that was like, even at this very moment, I think that's the best signing we've made. And I know it's gonna sound like kind of funny, but like I'm being for real. I think that was the best signing. Obviously, you wanted Brook Lopez to be your backup. Like I said, we'll touch on that in a bit. But once you missed out on him, the options for a replacement center kind of slimmed down. And, maybe you thought you were going to get Clint Capella, and then you didn't get Clint Capella. And I still wouldn't, like, if I'm the Rockets, I don't think the Jock Landale signing is stopping me from, still making a stab at a guy like Clint Capella or, like I said, Zubac from the Clippers might have been on the move. Like, I would still throw my hand in guys like that. Just, upgrade the backup big position even more. But let's say that we can't do that. Like Jock Landale, I think it's not a household name by any stretch of the imagination. But if you watch the playoffs this year, you'll see why I was like, okay, I like that signing. There were he didn't play that much, I think, but I do remember that there were times that Nugget series where I'm watching and Nugget series against the Suns this summer. I mean, this this playoff season. Goodness, and I remember I was like, this guy is like better than DeAndre Ayton. Like I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, they're playing better when Aiden's on the bench and Landale is playing. Like I remember like thinking that a couple of times. I'm like, yo, he's going like point for point, rebound for rebound with Aiden. And like in some cases, I think he's better than him, right? And so to sign him to a deal just period, I thought, to be our backup five behind Şengün, I thought that was a really good, like, yeah, like there's a world where this guy's a pretty good, backup big in the NBA. And the best part about it is, like, let's say he's not. Let's say that this guy stinks, and what I watched from him this year was a fluke. It's only 1 year guaranteed, so we can get off of it pretty easily if that guy is trash. So no, I love that signing, and I think Brad touched on it too. Like I think there's real potential for him to be somewhat of a floor spacer. It may not be like a Brook Lopez sniper, but Brad, you know what he shot overseas from three? Or probably I know it was something that was like surprisingly pretty nice for his position. I can't remember off the top of my head.
You're talking about Landale, correct?
Yeah, Landale.
Yeah, you shot 38.8%.
Okay, yeah. So I knew it was something like pretty solid. So yeah, I like the Landale signing. Like I said, that's probably my favorite player that we've signed this offseason. My second favorite signing is the Jeff Green signing. I thought that was also like a really good signing. Like Paulo said, former Rocket. He probably will not play, probably should not play that much, but the whole idea was to get vets in the locker room, which is probably the reason why I was kind of disappointed that Patty Mills got moved. Because I thought that was another guy who was going to be a really good vet. But the idea of this offseason was to bring some adults into the locker room. And so Jeff Green is an adult. He's somebody who Paulo touched on it. He's as Brandon Miller misses a floater. Let's go. He's another guy who he's won an NBA championship, right? Just won one this year. He's been in the league since I was like 5 years old. So he's, I'm saying, he's found a way to reinvent his game for over a decade now, to stay in the NBA. He's a professional. He's been on different teams, played with different all-time greats. So he knows what it takes to be a professional, to be a great player. And I think somebody even brought this up, but like a lot of the guys who ended up being really good mentors in the NBA weren't like the superstars. They were the journeymen, the guys who had been there and done that. That's who Jeff Green was. I don't know how many teams he's played on, but I mean, I think he's probably played for half the league at this point. Goodness gracious. So I love that. I think he's the kind of guy that this locker room has been missing since the rebuild started. And so even if he doesn't play that much, just having him, in the locker room, in these guys' ears, telling them how to take care of their bodies and, what to do and what to expect. I just think he's the kind of guy that we should have had this whole time. And so I'm really, really glad that he's here, even if he doesn't play that much for us this upcoming season. But moving on to the next couple of topics, we got KJ Martin getting traded to the Clippers for 2 second-round picks. Paulo, talk to me about that.
Man, I don't know. I don't think it's a good value, right? But at the same time, if we understand that KJ Martin is not going to get minutes here, other teams understand it too. They know the position the Rockets are in. They know they're about to bring in Dillon Brooks, who plays the same position for this amount of money. They know we just drafted Cam Whitmore. They know Jabari Smith and Tyrese are still on the team. They know KJ is the odd man out, right? And so when you approach a team to try and trade them, you're not going to get max value because other teams know why you're trying to do this. And they know that if they don't offer you what you want right now, call it a first-round pick, then eventually you're going to cave because he's on an expiring contract, right? If you drag this out to the deadline, you're likely not going to be able to play him more than 10, 15 minutes at best. He's going to lose value throughout the season. And then at the deadline, you're between a rock and a hard place because you either trade him or he's expiring at the end of the season anyways. And you didn't play him enough, so he's not going to re-sign with you because if there's something that we do know about KJ Martin is that if he's displeased, he'll let people know. He's the guy that was a second-round pick on a minimum deal and requested a trade, and his dad is who he is. So to me, the Rockets basically were just saving themselves the headache, right? 2 seconds is not the best value, but it's still something we've seen throughout the last year. More and more players just get traded for second-round picks because teams are not willing to give up firsts. I don't know in specific what the second-round picks are. I believe they're in 2026 and 2027, which among second-round picks is kind of nice because the Rockets have 4 second-round picks in 2024, so I'm happy they didn't grab a 5th. But yeah, man, KJ was a nice player while he was here. He was refreshing in the sense that he's fundamentally pretty sound. He's a good cutter. And in the mess that was Stephen Silas's offense with young players, it was refreshing and he stood out because of that. I think once you move on to more veteran players who know where to be at whichever time, that part of his game is going to shine a lot less. And you're going to start realizing that he's not a good shooter. And you're going to start realizing that he had a terrible year on defense. And eventually, I think he's someone who shined through on a bad team. I don't know how he's going to translate to a better team, especially because, listen, when you get to a better team as a wing, what's it about? It's about your defense and it's about your shooting. And while his defense looked good in his second year, in his third year, it didn't. And his shot has been basically the same thing as time went on. He got better, but then as volume got up, percentage got down. So it's unfortunate. He was, so I think someone who will look back fondly on when we remember the rebuild, but there was just no space for him anymore. So the Rockets took what they could get, I guess.
Yeah, when it comes to this KJ Martin deal,
Talk about your twin, man.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna miss him. I met him twice. Good guy. Never really. We probably exchanged like 3 words, but good guy. It sucks to see him go. One of the guys I've really enjoyed. He was the longest tenured Rockets player along with Jayshawn Tate. Now Tate is the only player still left. I'm just realizing this as I talk. Tate's the only one still left from the start of the Rockets rebuild.
Wow.
Yeah, I might tweet that out. But
I didn't realize that.
yeah, I just realized it too. But it's gonna suck to see KJ gone. But he did kind of join that no 3, no D club. That's not a guy that the Rockets can employ at the moment. So it's all good. KJ again, like after the All-Star break, 78% in the paint. That's those best in the NBA. So he's got a career in the NBA. I think he'll find that 3-point stroke, and I think he has. I think in the right setting with the right team and maybe even some really good coaching, he can be a good defender as well. But with the Rockets, he was the odd man out, and he doesn't fit the mold of a wing defender the Rockets kind of need. You look at them now; they have 4 really good wing defenders, and Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., Dillon Brooks, and then Jayshawn Tate. That's a good foursome right there to have defensively. So it's cool. I get they traded 2 seconds. I know people probably wanted it first. Kelly came on the show last week, and he said he was going to probably get traded for a late first or some seconds. So I wasn't surprised to see the deal. Sucks to see KJ go. But it makes sense for this roster too. So what do you think, Will?
He wasn't long for this roster, unfortunately. I think the drafting of Tari and Jabari last season, and then Cam Whitmore this season, kind of made it really difficult to see a future of him on the team, especially if he wasn't going to be able to space the floor. So you kind of knew. I remember I saw some people on draft night, and I was like, yeah, this was probably KJ's last night as a Rocket. And so like we all knew that it was coming. Initially you're like, man, just 2 seconds for KJ, because I do think KJ has a path to be a good NBA player in this league. Not necessarily he's gonna be like a star or a starter, but like he could be a piece on a team that wins a lot of games. And so you're like, well, man, like he only for 2 seconds. But then I remember that like Rui Hachimura went for I think 3 last year, and then James Wiseman went for 5. And yeah, I guess you could probably argue that KJ is better than both of those guys. But the market for for wings that really can't shoot and can't play defense isn't the best market. And I didn't think we were gonna get a first round pick for him. I think the best case scenario was like the 3 seconds that like the Lakers traded for Rui. So like it is what it is. I'm gonna miss KJ though. Cause I did like him a lot as a player. I think he's gonna have a really bright future ahead of him. So best of luck with the Clippers to KJ. But on to the last trade that we made. We forgot to even talk about how Josh Christopher got aggregated in the Dillon Brooks trade, but that's whatever. Gonna miss you, Josh. The next, what's up?
So we'll miss him for sure.
We're gonna miss you, Josh. But TyTy, Washington, Usman, Garuba, salary dumped. We paid to get rid of them to the Atlanta Hawks. So that kind of ties into the Brook Lopez conversation a little bit. But Paulo, what do you think about paying to dump the 29th pick last year and the 23rd pick the year before that?
Yeah, man. Listen, it's terrible value. It's a terrible move. It's not good. It's not the end of the world, because let's put it this way. It's not likely that TyTy or Garuba are going to be NBA players, right? They're late first round picks. They have potential. It's not likely that they will. This doesn't mean that they don't have value while they're young, because teams bet on that potential, right? While they have potential, they're worth something, which is why they are drafted. If just because a guy is drafted late, he's unlikely to be good, and so he's worthless. If that were the case, nobody would pick guys past 20, right? It's a terrible deal value-wise. Even as a straight salary dumping $5 million for 2 second-round picks is terrible value. I mean, we got 1 second-round pick for the Patty Mills dump, and Patty Mills is making $2 more million than these guys are combined. These guys are first-round picks. These guys are young talent. What I think happened, there's a part that I know happened because it's sourced. We talked about it on the Lager line. Multiple people have talked about it at this point. It's related to the Brook Lopez trade, right? I know that they were they thought they had the yes.
Actually, if you wanted to go ahead and just, we don't even have to wait for the next segment. If you want to go ahead and just talk about what happened with Brook Lopez and him backing out, go ahead. I know you have some insight on that.
Yeah, so I can just talk about that because they're closely related, and it's impossible to understand that Atlanta deal without understanding why it happened. I think the Rockets understand that it was their low value, but so the part that is source that I know happened, they had a deal with Brook Lopez, right, for more than the cap space that they had at the time, which was I think $26 million for a year. But they had the 2-year deal with him, agreed to, and Lopez, they finished Friday thinking, hey, we've got to deal with Brook Lopez. And then Saturday morning, Brook took that deal, took it to the Bucks, and said, hey, if you can get anywhere close to this, I'm going to sign with you, after giving the Rockets the go-ahead. And the Bucks caved. They gave him that money, and he signed there. And the Rockets were left, betrayed and blindsided. At the same time, because they were going to offer him more than the $26 million, because they didn't care. It's a 2-year deal, as I said, borrowed money, and he was the best center in the market. Well, they had already agreed to the salary dump with Atlanta, right? And at that point, the Rockets value their word a lot. And if there's something that we've seen throughout Rafael Storm's tenure, is that he cares about agent relationships and relationships with other teams a lot. We can look at guaranteeing DeMarcus Cousins' deal before waiving him. We can look at guaranteeing DeJounte's deal early. We can look at a number of things that they've done for players in order to foster those relationships. It's part of and there's positives and there's negatives to that. One of the positives is they got VanVleet. They could have just went ahead with a 2-year deal. They got that little extra with the team option, because they had a good relationship with Chris Paul. A good example of this was two situations that were happening at the same time last year. John Wall was getting paid to be on the bench, and the Rockets didn't smear him. The Rockets didn't didn't go around saying anything bad about him. At the same time, another one of Rick Paul's clients, Ben Simmons, was with the Sixers, was sitting on the bench. They didn't want him to play. He didn't want to play. But Daryl Morey was carrying a smear campaign, leaking all sorts of bad stuff about Ben Simmons, and it became a pretty ugly situation. It's two different ways of approaching it. The Rockets fostered that relationship and ended up getting a player option partly out of it, right? I'm sure it's not hard to understand that the reason why the player option didn't come out in the first place, right away, was because Clutch needed the deal to look good, and so they said, "Hey, it's 3 years, $130 million." And for the Rockets, who basically only care about the actual deal, they're okay with the public thinking for the day that it's that this big of a deal, and then just sneak through a report saying, "Hey, it's actually it's actually a team option, and it's a better deal." And the fans of the team will be happy because they'll pay attention and they'll know. But the agent will still get the good publicity of thinking, "Hey, this is a massive deal. Forget it's undrafted," whatever narratives you want to put on it. And so, because of all of these relationships, the Rockets didn't want to go back on the deal with the Hawks. You could argue that they could have, made the deal contingent on Brook Lopez signing in the first place. There's other things that go into that. If you make a deal contingent on something, there's also a chance that the other side will back out of it, and now you're stuck. You're going to have to do it with someone else, and you don't know, if you're able to. There's other things that, if you say that the deal is contingent on something, then now the other, and it wasn't a secret that Rockets were after Brook Lopez. But if you say the deal is contingent on Brook Lopez, and you're telling the Atlanta Hawks, "Hey, we're going to sign Brook Lopez," and disclosing your plan is never a good idea. So the Rockets didn't want to go back on their word. They didn't want to, damage relationships with the Atlanta Hawks front office. They didn't want to, and you could argue that they understand, but the Rockets didn't want to do that. And they thought, "Hey, at the end of the day, this is bad value, but it's a deal around the margins, right? It's unlikely that TyTy will play this season. If we keep him, we might have been able to get better value out of him. Maybe we could get a second-round pick or two. But likely he won't play. Likely he'll be in the D League for the entire year. Likely these guys aren't going to amount to much because we're trying to win now, and we already have six guys on the young core, and we have 2 vets that we're bringing in, plus Jock Landale now." And so the Rockets thought it wasn't worth it, right, to go back on that deal. That being said, I'm not going to defend the deal whatsoever in the first place. Because I understand that you may have been desperate to open a little bit of cap space to offer extra money to Brook Lopez. Doesn't change the fact that it's an awful deal. Even if you bring in Brook Lopez in a vacuum, it's a terrible valuation. As I said, it's terrible from how much of salary was being dumped versus the price they paid. It's terrible because these are young players. I refuse to believe that there isn't one team out there that will take them for free. If a team that's just going through a rebuild, like the Trailblazers, for example, or a team like the Spurs, who is in a rebuild but could use a point guard prospect, I refuse to believe that isn't one team that will take a shot on these guys for free. They were first round picks in the last 2 years. It's terrible value. The only explanation that I can think of, and this is not sourced, the only explanation that I can think of is like, oh, Brook Lopez said, oh, like you offered them the 26 million of cap space that you had. And his agent came back and said, hey, we're willing to, this is speculation, this part's not sourced. I can imagine that they came back and said, hey, for 26 million, we're not willing to do it, but we're willing to say yes right now if you offer us 28 million or 30 million for 2 years. It's a bullet contract, but the Rockets didn't care for 2 years. And in order to be able to offer them that contract, and you need to scramble and you need to quickly find a way to get that cap space. And I can imagine they called the Hawks and they thought, hey, for 2 second-round picks, who cares? We're getting Brook Lopez. That's the bigger deal. Let's just get the deal done and make sure we have the space for them, right? Similar situation to what happened with Daryl Morey and Chris Bosh, where they used the first-round pick to dump the Jeremy Lin contract to go after Chris Bosh, and then Chris Bosh didn't sign, and they spent the first-round pick for nothing. It's a very similar situation, but at the same time, I can't justify not getting better value out of these guys. It's not the end of the world. They're likely not going to be NBA players, but it doesn't change the fact that you could have gotten better value. It's objectively a bad deal. Even if Brook Lopez is coming, which would make it a little bit more understandable, it's still a bad deal in a vacuum to use. You could have, maybe traded away Jason Tate to open up the cap space, right? It doesn't have to be these guys. Maybe they preferred it to be these guys, but it's somewhat naive, right, to hang so much on the word of a player. Maybe they'll learn from this for next time. Maybe it is the first time this front office has massive amounts of cap space. They got played, right? And it cost an agent somewhat of their word and the value of their word. But at the end of the day, I think they're laughing to the bank with the fact that Brook got to have a lot of, close to the same amount of money and remain in a contender, which I think is what he wanted from the get-go. So I'm not going to justify the deal. I think it's awful, but I understand. I'm somewhat sympathetic because of the circumstances under which it happened.
I'll say this about the deal. I think you're right. You put on the money, you're trading 2 first-round picks for negative value. It can be frustrating just looking back at it. You have 2 guys. TyTy, I think, has potential. I think he could be a really good point guard in this league one day. And he was misused completely this past season, playing behind a guy who had more turnovers and made field goals. So TyTy misused. Usman, Garuba. I liked him as a player as well. Just needed a 3-ball to be a solid guy in this position. But as you mentioned again, Paulo, you trade 2 first-round picks pretty much for nothing, and it's poor asset management. And as a whole, it's interesting that the entire thing pretty much happened because they thought they were getting Brook Lopez, as you mentioned as well. So when I look at it in that standpoint, I was surprised to see that they prioritized, being good business partners to another team. Like, okay, we don't want to back out. We already did this. And that was interesting to me. I put out a tweet and I said that was they're going for good business and got misinterpreted. Because as a whole, it's bad business for the Rockets for them to do that. Trade these guys for bad or for negative value. But my tweet was misinterpreted, and I was with the family. I didn't feel like clarifying it. But my point was pretty much they prioritized having good relationships with guys around the league. I respect it. Would I do that? No, I would not have done that. So it was interesting to see that go down. But yeah, you losing those 2 guys in TyTy and Garuba. I wanted TyTy to potentially stay. I know he didn't have a role in the Rockets, but again, this is a team that won 22 games. I'm knowing change is about to come. A lot of the young guys are going to be gone, so it didn't surprise me. I wasn't too upset, but when you look at it from the standpoint that you got negative value, it's pretty annoying. And as you mentioned, Paulo, again, I probably wouldn't care at all if they ended up getting Brook Lopez, because I probably would have been throwing a parade.
I would have been mad still. That I think that you just can't, like, just from an asset management standpoint, like, Nah, bro. Even if you did get a Brook Lopez, I still would have been like, I mean, I obviously wouldn't have been as mad because you just got Brook Lopez, but no, that still is bad business, is bad GMing, no matter how you look at it. I agree with Paulo. TyTy Washington was a first round pick just 365 days ago. And in like this was somebody who was considered a draft steal, right? Because he was like a lottery pick on a lot of draft boards prior to his injury at Kentucky. And then we also know how the Kentucky guard, translates to the next level. So I believe TyTy Washington has, I think he has the potential to be a really good, if nothing else, a backup point guard in our NBA. So I believe a lot in him. And I think Usman Garuba is somebody who, he's interesting because he's definitely a lot of like, he's a project, a boomer bust kind of guy. But you could see a world where Garuba, can contribute something. And like, if not, the dude's is on a rookie scale contract, which I believe like it's what the third of the fourth year not being guaranteed. So like, okay, you take a risk on him and he stinks it up again. Like you just don't, you know what I'm saying? You just don't bring him back for the fourth year if that's what you want to do. So I'm gonna disagree that the same GM that was able to turn Bruno Fernando and Garrison Matthews into positive value could not have done the same for TyTy Washington and Usman. Like, even if you want to say Garuba sucks, like TyTy, I think TyTy alone is worth more than what the Hawks, but I think we got 2 seconds from the Hawks, ironically enough, for Matthews and Fernando. Like, I think TyTy is at worst worth that as well. And if he's not worth that, you have to ask yourself, well, why is he not worth that much? Well, part of it, the problem is you didn't play him last year. And the guy you played over him, you cut. And I mean, everybody else who watched the Rockets, anybody with a brain, all due respect to Daisha Nix, it's not an NBA player. He's probably going to need to go somewhere overseas, maybe to the G League. But, what was that, year 2 Daisha Nix? Not an NBA player. And so the fact this guy was our backup point guard taking 18, 20 minutes a night when you had a first-round pick who also played that same position who, maybe may or may not have been ready for the moment, but we don't know because we ain't play him. And then the guy you played over him, like I said, you just cut the other day. Like if their value is low, it's probably because you misused them as assets on the court while they were Rockets. And my thing is just if you're because if Stone and Silas were just that disconnected to where Stone had no idea that Silas was not going to play these guys, then shame on them for that. But I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they were not that disconnected. And I think Stone had to have known that there probably wasn't going to be that many like minutes for those two guys initially. And so if that's the case, and you know that you're not gonna play them, maybe don't draft 4 rookies in the same class. Maybe don't draft 3 rookies in the same. On top of you already have a super duper young roster with KPJ, KJ Martin, and I know Jason Tate's not necessarily young, but that was somebody who the Rockets viewed as like a building block moving forward. Maybe you don't add, or Christian Wood was here 2 years ago, right? That's another guy who was 25, 26 when he got to Houston. So another guy who the Rockets could have potentially looked at as like a building block moving forward. Maybe you don't draft that many young guys to a young team if you don't have a role for them, and then 2 years along you got to trade it for screen. You got to move stuff to get off of them. I think OKC does a really cool thing every summer, where because they have the most draft picks in the entire NBA. If they have a pick that they don't want to make, they just trade it. They attach something to it and trade it down the line. And now they have that they delay the pick by like a year or 2 or whatever, right? And I think that's good GMing. If you don't want to draft TyTy Washington because you're not going to be able to play him, don't draft him. Trade the pick. Trade it, delay it a year, 2, or I don't know. Trade it for, if you just want to trade it for a vet, sure. Do something with it that'll result in positive value for the team. But we not only did we not see any type of return on that investment of a first round pick, we lost stuff to get rid of that first round pick. And so, like, yeah, man, even if we got Brook Lopez, I thought that was bad, managing. But also to Brook Lopez, shame on you for going back on your word. So, yeah, just all around unfortunate situation that kind of, this also came out, I think, like right before the Dillon Brooks signing. So it was not a great time Saturday afternoon to be a Rockets fan at that point in time. But it's done. Best of luck to TyTy and Garuba in Atlanta. So I still believe a lot in TyTy. Garuba, I can see it. I don't know necessarily. But But yeah, man, I think that'll conclude my thoughts on anything that happened this summer with free agency. There's still some cap space that the Rockets could potentially spend, and so who knows what they do with that. Obviously, we got you covered over here if they make a move. But that's all I have to say. Anybody else anything want to chime in before we start wrapping up?
I'll just say this. I give them as a whole, looking at the offseason, going from this 3 years of 17-win basketball, 21 basketball, 22-win basketball. They're going to try to make the playoffs this season. Looking at the moves they made, it's tough to see playoffs play in, but, at the end of the day, it's on that young core to step it up. And that's where they're going to get the biggest growth. If they're able to grow from the coaching staff and, these new vets that came in, then that's where that leap is going to come. So I'll give this offseason a B minus as a whole.
I want to touch on one thing you said. I did want to touch on. I'm glad you reminded me. I don't know about y'all, but I mean the moves that the roster, the organization made to max Fred, to overpay, in my opinion, for Dillon Brooks. You traded away KJ Martin. You traded away TyTy and Garuba and Josh Christopher and didn't really get any returns in those investments, right? Like those are decisions that you make to win basketball games. I don't think those are decisions that you make if you're cool just with natural progression. And so for me, I know it wasn't a popular take when I said it on Twitter today. Man, I'm looking at next season like 10th seed playing tournament or bust. If you told me that the Rockets were cool with just winning 35 games, I would tell you that they absolutely failed this offseason. Like I would tell you that they made colossal mistakes if the goal was just to win 35 games. Because I know people look at us and say we suck, but I genuinely believe that replacing Steven Silas with a guy like Ime Udoka, I think that accounts for wins. I think replacing Daisha Nix and Brad's 0 percentile lineups with an actual NBA, like we played a bunch of guys who were not even NBA players last year. So just replacing the non-NBA guys with actual NBA guys, especially like on our second unit, I think that accounts for wins. I think year 3 leaps from Alperen Şengün and Jalen Green and, the natural progression. I think Jabari Smith, we don't like to say it, but he was one of the worst players in the entire NBA last year. And he was just as big of a tank commander as Daisha Nix at times, right? So expecting him to not be the worst player in the NBA anymore, that accounts for wins. I went and did some research on a lot of top picks who were drafted to the bad teams and when they started taking leaps. And it was year 3. That's when John Morant and the Grizzlies took that leap. That's when Trae Young and the Hawks took a leap. That's when Darius Garland and the Cavs took that leap. It's always that third year where they start, breaking out. And those were straight up playoff teams. I'm just saying make the play-in tournament. Just get me the 10th seed, right? I think that that's a very realistic ask. And I think that's why you go out there and you make the moves that you make this offseason so you can start winning. Udoka said it himself. He's not, he hasn't missed the playoffs in his career. I don't think he wants to start doing it now. So I look at that. And then I'll wrap it by saying, because of that, right? Because we no longer have the Steven Silases and the Daisha Nix, and now there's vets in the locker room, and KPJ isn't the point guard no more. There's no more excuses. There's no more excuses for Jalen and Şengün and Bari and Tar. Everybody who we for the last 2-3 years we've been making excuses for. Well, that's done. There's no more excuses to be made. It's time for, if these guys are supposed to be the next generation of Rockets hoops, show us why. Right? There's no more crutches. There's no more it's this guy's fault that Jalen shot inefficiently tonight. Well, no, man, it's on Jalen now. So, and I'm not saying I think Jalen's going to shoot inefficiently. I think he will be efficient. But the point I'm making is if you are supposed to be that guy, well, now it's time to show us. You have all the resources, everything you need to be successful. Time to be successful. So, I'm excited for next season, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of our free agency period. I think I gave it a C plus, somewhere in that range. So I wasn't the biggest fan of free agency, but even with that, I still think that expecting a play-in push is not unrealistic, and I think anything less than that would be a failure of a season.
Yeah, I'm with you on. I think it's play-in or bust. I think a lot of people talk about 35 wins and they think that that's a play-in team. Well, last year it wasn't.
Nope.
It was one of the most even years for the NBA, at least since I've been a fan. There were no 60-win teams. I don't think anybody won more than 55 games. It was a very even season, which means that trickles down, and the 10th seed was 40 wins, right? I mean, I agree with you with Will. Anything that's not a play-in push this season is a failure of a season. I disagree a little bit with Brad. I actually rate the offseason as a whole a little bit higher because I think I still give them, I know we're just coming out of free agency and that's going to stink a little bit because it's not what a lot of people expected, especially on the value of the deals. But I think hiring Ime Udoka is a home run. And the upgrade from South to Udoka is massive. I think they killed the draft. I think Eamon Thompson and Cam Whitmore is a stellar draft. I think in the last 3 drafts, they got 2 top 10 picks in each draft, and they only picked in the top 10 3 times. I think Alperen Sengun's top 10 in this class. I think Tariq's top 10 in this class, and I think Cam Whitmore should have been at top 10 in this class. I don't think that's really disputable. So, but at the same time, I agree with Will where free agency, might have not gone the way you wanted, but you spent the money, right? And you brought VanVleet, your top target. You brought Dillon Brooks, right? I think the theme for this free agency is, and I've been trying to drive this home, is they got rid of a lot of their margin for error, right? A lot of the disposable assets that they had, they're not part of the core. They got rid of them. They got rid of KJ Martin. They got rid of TyTy, Josh, and Garuba, right? If they want to make a deal around the margins right now, it's either second-round picks or going to be dipping into one of the core 6 guys or Brooklyn picks or future picks from the Rockets past 2027. And so since they removed a lot of that flexibility and a lot of that, leeway assets-wise, well, now they gotta hope that what they have really works. And to me, it's exciting to go into a season where I'm going to be rooting for a win every single game, right? I'm going to be hoping every single shot goes in. I'm not going to lie to you. There were times during the rebuild that I not only rooted for losses, but if depending on who the shot was coming from, I wanted it to go in or not. If it was Garrison Matthews shooting, I couldn't give less of a shit if Charles went in or not. If it was Jalen Green shooting, I wanted the shot to go in. So I'm glad to finally put that behind me. And, whoever's shooting, I want the shot to go in. Whoever's shooting the other team, I want the shot to not go in. I'm excited to root for wins every single night again. The Rockets put themselves in a position by trading away, by not going back on their word and by the deals that they made, put themselves in a position where there's not a lot of disposable assets for them to move to tailor the team or to address specific needs going forward. And so you've got to hope that what you've brought, which I think they, the core, besides not getting Brook Lopez, is what they wanted. It's the top 6 guys. It's an all-star point guard, even though it's only a one-time all-star, but it's the best point guard that they wanted. And it's Dillon Brooks, who is the wing that they wanted to bring in. So now it's time to, it's, I call it put up or shut up time. Now you've got to go out there, and Ime Udoka has to go out there and coach these guys and win these games, because otherwise, they fall on their sword, right? They made these decisions. This, up to this point, it was a lot of drafting best player available, not really any big commitments. Well, now they made the big commitments, right? By trading away young players, by signing a guy like Fred VanVleet to a massive deal, by signing Dillon Brooks to a massive deal. They made those commitments, and now it's time to see your vision. What does it amount to, right? And in a year, we can be talking about this offseason as something that's really positive, because they went out and they won 40 games, and Jalen took a leap, and Sengun took a leap, and Jabari Smith looked like an NBA player, and Tariq can now make his layups, and whatever it is. And Fred VanVleet was a great leader, and he kept his insane assist to turnover ratio, was a good defender, an awesome shooter as well, and everything worked out. Well, it kind of gets me hyped up that it's time. Now we're going to see what you're made of, and I'm excited to see what these Rockets are made of, because they got to implement their vision. This is their vision. Let's see what it amounts to. I'm excited to see how it turns out. I overall grade the coaching hire an A+, grade the draft an A+, grade free agency a mixed bag, maybe a C, maybe a C+, but on average, I would still give it like a B+ or an A- of an offseason, because I think the 2 most important moves were getting the coach right, and I think they did, and getting the draft right, because that's what's going to impact us long term. Most of the guys we got in free agency are crutches for the next couple of years. They're still important crutches because the hardest part of a rebuild is jumping from the bottom 5 team in the league to someone that's competing. Used to be for the 8th seed, now for the 10th seed because that's the play. If they're able to make that move, we're now a team that's, the Chicago Bulls have no future or have a couple of players that could be a part of their future and they just made the play, right? If we can get to that quality of a team while retaining Jalen Green, Amen Thompson, Alperen Şengün, Tyrese, and Jabari Smith, Cam Whitmore, we're mediocre, correct? But we have a massive amount of upside while being mediocre. And so, as I said, let's go into the season and let's see what they got. And until then, we have a little taste of summer league to get excited about.
Yeah, and the quick clarification. I think I said off season as a B. I want to, say I think the free agency I give a B minus B. As a whole, you put the I was gonna mess up an analogy, but I mean, if you talk about the coaching hire, of course, in the draft, those are both A's in my opinion, right? As you said, home runs. So I can't complain about those at all. So as a whole, A minus, A minus for the entire offseason. Teams going in the right direction, and then again, I already touched on free agency, but I just want to clarify. But yeah, that's all I got for this episode. Well, if you had nothing else, I want to thank Paulo for joining the show. It's probably like your 4th, 5th time on. So
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we didn't give you a chance to plug yourself before. Paulo does a really good podcast with Ben Dubose, really tapped in. Rockets Insider. They have a lot of great guests. So Paulo, go ahead and tell listeners where they can find your show.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter if Twitter is working at this point at Paulo Alves NBA, and you can find my podcast with Ben at the Lager Line on Twitter. It's we're sponsored by Sports Talk 790 and Garuba Brewing. So give us a listen. Maybe you'll like it.
Yeah, give him a listen. Again, Paulo, appreciate you. For myself, you guys know to find me at Bradeaux NBA, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. If y'all still listening, an hour and 10 minutes in, we appreciate you guys. Make sure you hit that sub button if you haven't already. And we're going to be coming soon for the Summer League games. So excited to talk to you then.
And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BiasSusan. Like Brad said, thank you guys for listening. And we will see you guys next time.